The silence in the car on the drive home was a living thing. It wasn't the empty quiet of a peaceful morning, but a thick, heavy blanket of aftermath. I had spent 2 days in that sterile hotel room, watching my phone light up with the distant fireworks of a life detonating, and now I was returning to the epicenter. The world outside the windshield looked exactly the same. The same trees, the same houses, the same sky. But I knew it was an illusion. The world had been remade. I had remade it. I pulled into the driveway of the house that was no longer my home. It was just a structure now, a beautiful shell holding the ghost of a marriage. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the windows gleamed, a perfect picture of success. I almost laughed. The most beautiful facades often hide the most profound decay. I turned off the engine and sat for a long moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I took a deep breath, not of courage but of finality. This was the last scene of the last act. The front door felt heavier than I remembered. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the scent of neglect and despair. The grand open-plan living room was shrouded in twilight, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. And there he was, slumped in the same expensive armchair he'd chosen to impress clients, still wearing the rumpled, expensive suit from his day of reckoning. He looked like a statue of a ruined king. He heard me and his head lifted slowly. The sight of his face was a shock, even to my prepared heart. It was a landscape of devastation. His eyes were swollen and bloodshot, sunk deep into sockets of purple shadow. Stubble darkened his jaw. He looked 10 years older. The confident, grinning man from the beach photograph was utterly erased. "Maya," he whispered, his voice a cracked and broken thing. It was the voice of a man who had screamed himself hoarse into an uncaring void. I didn't answer. I closed the door behind me with a soft, definitive click and walked slowly into the room. I placed my bag on the floor, the movement deliberate and calm. I could feel his gaze clinging to me, desperate, begging for a lifeline. He was waiting for the script he knew. The concerned wife, the comforting embrace, the shared crisis. "They're gone," he rasped, the words tumbling out in a rush of despair. "All of them, Pierce. He won't even take my calls. The VCs, they've frozen everything. They're talking about a forensic audit, lawsuits, criminal charges, Maya. Criminal." He let out a wet, shuddering sob, his face collapsing into his hands. "My name? They're dragging my name through the mud. Everything I built, everything we built, it's just gone." He wept then. Great, heaving sobs that racked his entire body. It was a raw, ugly, unfiltered display of grief. He was mourning his kingdom. He was mourning his reputation. He was the architect of his own ruin, and the realization was finally, fully breaking him. And Chloe, he looked up, his eyes pleading for my sympathy, my shared outrage. She left. She sent me a text. She said I was a liability. She said I ruined her career. The betrayal in his voice was so rich, so utterly blind to his own, that it was almost fascinating. I stood there, in the center of the room, and I simply watched him. I let the silence stretch, let it fill the space between us until it became a physical presence. I didn't move to comfort him. I didn't gasp in shock. I didn't cry. I was a still, calm lake after a hurricane has passed. He finally seemed to notice my silence, my stillness. His sobs subsided into ragged breaths. He looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a flicker of confusion break through his self-pity. Why wasn't I reacting? Why wasn't I falling apart with him? I took one step closer. My heart was not pounding. My hands were not shaking. I looked down at the broken man in the chair, the man I had loved for 7 years, the man who had shared my bed and my dreams, while meticulously building a secret life with someone else. I met his bewildered, bloodshot gaze. The air was so still you could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. And then I spoke. Just 2 words. My voice was low, even, and as calm as the deep ocean. "I know." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. His breath hitched, his mouth falling slightly open. For a single, suspended second, there was only pure, uncomprehending confusion. I know what? I know he's upset. I know he lost the company. And then, the dawning. It was a slow, terrible sunrise of horror in his eyes. It started as a tiny spark of realization, then spread, consuming the confusion, burning away the self-pity, until there was nothing left but a chilling, devastating clarity. I know, it wasn't a question. It wasn't an expression of sympathy. It was a statement of fact, a verdict. I know about Chloe. I know about Veritas 2.0. I know about the launch. I know about the betrayal. Not from the emails he received yesterday, but for weeks. For months. I know the spa trip was an alibi. I know his downfall wasn't an ambush. It was an execution. He was no longer looking at his wife. He was looking at the architect. He was looking at the ghost who had lived in his machine, who had studied his blueprints, and who had, with surgical precision, pulled the one thread that would unravel his entire world. The truth was a more devastating weapon than any lawsuit. The knowledge that I, the woman he had taken for granted, the woman he thought was oblivious and safely tucked away, had been the one to hold the knife. It shattered the last remaining pillar of his reality. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. What was there to say? How could you? Would have been the ultimate hypocrisy. He just stared, his face a pale mask of stunned comprehension. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was filled with the roaring truth of what I had done. I didn't need to say another word. I didn't need to list my evidence, to detail my plan, to gloat. My calmness, my lack of surprise, my 2 simple words. They were a more complete confession than any monologue could ever be. I had taken his legacy, his truth, and now I had taken the last shred of his understanding of the world. I turned away from him. I picked up my bag. I walked out of the living room, through the grand foyer, and opened the front door. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the afternoon sun, pulling the door closed behind me. The solid thud of the heavy door was the final note. The confrontation was over. There was nothing left. The divorce proceedings were a dry, bureaucratic affair. My lawyer, Eleanor, handled everything. Liam's side was crippled, his resources frozen, his spirit broken. He put up no fight. He signed the papers in a daze, a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him long before the judge made it official. The house was sold. I took my half of the remains, not as a prize, but as severance pay for a job I never applied for. The job of being the supportive wife to a man who saw me as part of the scenery. I found a space downtown, a loft with north-facing windows that flooded the room with a clean, constant light. The front half I turned into my studio. I painted the walls a bright, stark white. I bought canvases and stretched them myself. I arranged my brushes in old mason jars, their handles pointing to the ceiling like promises. The back half, behind a simple bookshelf divider, became my home. A small bed, a simple kitchen, a chair by the window. It was small, but it was mine. Every splatter of paint on the floor, every book on the shelf, every breath I took in that space belonged to me. There were no ghosts here. No lies woven into the very plaster. I started painting again. Not the soft, pleasing abstracts I used to make, the kind that matched our decor. I painted with bold, aggressive colors, deep blues and fiery reds and vibrant, defiant golds. I painted a self-portrait, not of my face, but of my spine, a strong, unyielding column of light against a dark, chaotic background. I painted the moment of silence before I spoke those 2 words. I painted the feeling of the steering wheel in my hands as I drove away for the last time. People hear whispers of the story. They call it a revenge story. They get a dark, excited glint in their eyes and tell me it must have felt so sweet, so satisfying, to destroy him like that. They are wrong. So completely wrong. This was never about revenge. Revenge is a fire you stoke with the logs of your own hatred. It might warm you for a night, but eventually, it consumes you, leaving you as cold and ashen as the thing you burned. What I did was not an act of destruction. It was an act of reclamation. He had built a prison for me. The bars were his lies, the walls were my own trust, and the lock was my love for him. It was a beautiful prison, comfortable and gilded, but a prison nonetheless. I didn't just escape. I didn't pick the lock and run. I took a sledgehammer to the very foundation. I dismantled it, brick by painful brick, and when I was done, I used the rubble to build a new foundation for myself. I didn't destroy him out of hate. I dismantled his lie to free my own truth. The collapse of his world was not my goal. It was a consequence, a necessary demolition to clear the space for my own building to begin. Now, I stand in my studio. The morning light is streaming in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny fairies. I am standing in front of a large, blank canvas. It is terrifying and exhilarating, all that potential, all that white space waiting for a story. My story. I pick up a brush. I dip it into a color called Phoenix Red, and I begin to paint. I am not painting a picture of a happy ending. I am painting a picture of a true beginning. The woman taking shape on the canvas is alone. But she is not lonely. She is whole. She is looking forward, her eyes clear, her posture her own. There is no one else in the frame, no shadow falling over her, no hand guiding hers. This is the perfect picture now, not because it is without pain or memory, but because it is honest. Every brushstroke is a choice I made. Every color is a feeling I owned. He built an empire on a lie called veritas. I am building a life on the simple, unshakable foundation of my own truth. The painting is almost finished. I step back, wiping my hands on a rag stained with 100 different hues. I look at my creation, at the woman staring back at me with my own eyes, and I feel a peace so profound it is almost a sound, a low, steady hum in my soul. He gave me a lie, a beautiful, devastating, perfectly framed lie, and in return, I gave him the truth, the whole, unvarnished, devastating truth. And in the end, that was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose.